Today, we will learn about what is Terra and why it's on the cloud, creating and running analyses on custom cloud environments, and then finding example resources to help get started. So first, we will start with a poll. How comfortable are you with using cloud data on a scale of 1 to 3, 3 being very comfortable, 2 being somewhat comfortable, and 1 being not comfortable at all? Anton, do you want to get the poll started?
So unfortunately, we can't make the poll work in this meeting. So everyone should just type their response into the chat.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of 1s and 2s and a couple of 3s. Thank you all for the feedback. So let's go ahead and get started. So Terra, let's talk about accessing data, running analysis tools, and collaborating on the cloud. Data generation is on a roll, as you may know. And if you're trying to unlock the mysteries of human genetics, today there's a lot of data to work with. Governments and other institutions have invested millions of dollars in generating data sets like 1,000 genomes with 3,000 participants, and all of us with over 1 million participants. And computing advances mean it's possible to turn this data into meaningful insights that can improve other people's lives. And while this is amazing in theory, there's just so much data that it's hard to find the data you want, download and store the data, interpret and analyze file formats. There's tons of different file formats, and some can be confusing, especially if you're combining data from large data sets that might be using advanced compression, and sharing with collaborators in a way that's efficient and secure. And these are just challenges I've listed for finding and accessing your data. So this is before you even start analysis, and that comes with its own challenges too. Analysis requires large and it's expensive infrastructure investments to handle times when you need a lot of processing power, and anyone who can't afford the big infrastructure ends up being locked out. And analysis tools and computing environments are complex. Oftentimes you need custom tools, you might need a custom environment. And if that's the case, how are you going to find and set those up? It's hard to find the right tools and set up the right computational environment, especially if you're not a programming expert. And these custom complex analysis tools and environments lead to non-reproducible results, which makes it harder to build on existing studies. And with all these challenges working with this data, especially in large amounts, this is where Terra comes in. Terra is a cloud native platform that's designed to remove some of the barriers of working in the cloud. So traditional bioinformatics looks like this. It's a central repository which holds all the data, and each researcher copies it to a local storage to analyze with their own analysis tools in their own custom computing environment. This approach has a couple of negatives, including instead of data sharing, we're doing data copying to local storage. There's high data storage costs since everyone is storing their own copy, and non-reproducible results because every analysis is done in an isolated environment using those custom tools we just mentioned. And there's huge infrastructure costs for expensive fixed compute resources that some people just can't afford. And lastly, there's individual security implementations, which means security is only as good as the weakest security anywhere in any copy of the data. And all of these things get in the way of being able to actually use the data. And this is where cloud-centric approach comes in. A cloud-based model for bioinformatics looks more like this. Data rests in a central repository in the cloud where researchers access and analyze together in a virtual environment. With this new vision, you get cloud-based storage, which is true immediate data sharing. You only pay for a single storage instance that many can access, and you have shareable tools and containers, which means the results are reproducible. And you have cost-effective elastic computing. You're not paying for compute power when you're not using it. Since cloud resources can scale to meet your needs, you don't need to make big infrastructure investments and that makes research more equitable too. Also, there's centralized data security, which removes the responsibility from individuals and enables comprehensive security fences. And this sounds great in theory, but clouds can be pretty difficult to use out of the box. You may have questions like, how do I set up and pay for cloud storage? How do I find and access data already in the cloud? How do I find and set up computational resources in the cloud? How do I share my data and my resources with my collaborators? And how can I do this in a way that is secure? And this is where Terra comes in. Terra is co-developed by the BroadE Institute in collaboration with Microsoft and Verily Life Sciences. Terra is a web interface designed to do the heavy lifting and help move your analysis to the cloud. Terra's combination of features empowers you to work effectively in the cloud. The platform enables you to do all aspects of the research project in one place, so you can find data. Terra has libraries including both public and restricted access data sets, which can be directly linked to the platform, workspaces, access data securely and immediately, and share work easily, and analyze with two modes of computation, workflows from DocStore and the BroadE's method repository, and interactive analysis with in-app Jupyter Notebooks, Galaxy, and RStudio. And Terra isn't an island. It's part of an open ecosystem. Terra is modular, standards-based, and has open source components. This means you have the flexibility to do many things. You can find and access data, but you can also bring in your own. And you can access tools, but you can also bring in your own tools. You can perform analyses and share securely with built-in security features. And centralized security means all components of the ecosystem exist within a FISMA and FedRAMP moderate environment. This satisfies the security requirements for many controlled access datasets. Terra is FedRAMP authorized as a moderate impact system with an agency authorization. You can find Terra listed in the FedRAMP marketplace. And what about putting PIH data in Terra? You can see our terms of service for the latest information. There's a whole section on HIPAA, PIH, and clinical compliance features. Users who decide to upload, store, or otherwise transfer PIH using the site must implement all of the required clinical features and must enter into a formal agreement with Terra and FireCloud stating that the uploading, storing, and transferring of PIH using the site by users that have not implemented the clinical features is strictly prohibited. And users cannot get around this by anonymizing data before uploading it. And so let's get started today, and I'll pass it over to Anton.
Thank you so much, Yasha. I'm going to pause here for just 30 seconds to ask if there are any questions about what you just heard, since we saw a lot of people answer one to the question of their familiarity.
I'll just add for the PHI questions that folks may have. If you are unsure about your data set and whether or not you should be analyzing it into Terra, you can reach out to support@terra.bio, and we can make sure to work with our security team to answer any questions you may have about that. And I'll just underline something Yasha said, that users do get around with anonymizing their data and bringing it into the system if they do have PHI. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Tiffany. So it's totally all right if everyone wants to hold their questions until the end. We can get started with our tour of Terra. Let me just share my screen. Here we are on the landing page of Terra. That's accessed through the address app.terra.bio. It's very easy to remember. And I'm going to start by showing you around the main menu. First, I'm going to point out that the landing page has a couple of convenient links right on the front that we'll actually take a closer look at by accessing them through the main menu. But you can see right here, we try to make it very accessible to go to our workspaces, view different examples. We have a gallery of showcase featured workspaces that are very useful. They have different types of use cases, and you can clone them based on your own needs. And also, there's a way to access the various data portals that are integrated into Terra. You will be able to find all of this and more by clicking on the main menu button here. So go ahead and feel free to follow me along as I'm doing this. You don't need to follow along with this portion. I'll let you know at what point it becomes important for you to do the same actions that I'm doing so that you don't fall behind when it comes to creating your own workspaces. In the meantime, I want to start by pointing out that underneath the username, there is a section of different items. There's profile information. There's a place where you can check what authorization domain groups you're included in. There's a section where you can check what billing projects you're a part of and what billing accounts you have access to. So if you signed up for the temporary billing account today, then if you go into this section, you should be able to see workshop-BroadE-2210. You can also access all of your existing cloud environments by going to this cloud environments section. Right now, if you were to click on it, it would be empty, assuming you've never launched a cloud environment before. So we're going to launch a cloud environment today, and you'll be able to see how that populates into this section. So I cleaned up all of my cloud environments before this workshop. So the only one that I have right now is one that there's an error that makes it impossible for me to delete this row, but the environment itself is gone. So it's costing me $0 an hour. And this is a very convenient place where you can see the list of all of your existing environments, whether or not they are running. So that would be reflected in the status. And also it lists all of the persistent disks that are attached to those environments. So we'll show you all of those things in the second portion of our demonstration today. And of course, there's a sign out button. In addition to that, there is a section where all of your workspaces are organized. So if I click into this, then it might seem like there's a kind of an intimidatingly large amount of things here, but that's just because I have access to a lot of different workspaces. This is the page where you organize all of your workspaces, or rather where all of your workspaces are organized for you. You can search in the workspaces by keyword, by tags. So all of our featured and public workspaces have tags to match them up with different subject areas. Access level, you can filter them by access levels, so I can look at only the workspaces that I'm an owner on, and also what workspaces belong to which billing projects. And then I just want to point out that these tabs here are inclusive, so all of my workspaces reflect all of the workspaces that are purely mine that I created, but also workspaces that other people have given me access to. And also it's inclusive of the various types of public offerings we have. So we have over 300 public workspaces. We'll actually be working in a public workspace later today. During the second portion of this demonstration, we're going to go to this T101 quick start workspace. Of those 300 public workspaces, some 60 workspaces are featured workspaces, and we'll take a closer look at the list of featured workspaces in a moment. But they are curated workspaces that get regularly tested for their functionality and their use cases. And of course, we have certain ones that we find are particularly new and interesting, so we want to emphasize them. There's also a convenient recently viewed function right here, so I can uncollapse mine and you can see the different workspaces that I've recently been working on. And that's where you can organize your workspaces. This is also where you can create a new workspace from scratch. So we won't be doing that today because we're going to clone workspaces, which is an even more convenient way of creating workspaces, if you ask me. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a Terra workspace, the Terra workspace is the basic building block of Terra. It's a entirely self-contained digital laboratory. It has note-taking capabilities. It has a place where you can organize workflows. It has a place where you can organize different types of interactive analyses like Jupyter notebooks. You can run RStudio and Galaxy instances, and we'll show you how all of that works. If you wanted to create a workspace from scratch, you would come to this section. You would give your workspace a name and select a billing project. You don't necessarily have to select an authorization domain. An authorization domain is like a security badge. So you can create a group under the groups section, or you can be added to such a group. And that group acts as an authorization domain. And so you can protect workspaces that you work in behind an authorization domain. And then if you create a workspace behind an authorization domain, if other people wanted access to it, they would have to be added to that authorization domain and then specify that that's how they want to create their own clone. So in addition to that, we have a huge library of things that should help you do all sorts of research in the cloud. So I'm going to, first I want to point out that these 3 links right here under the library section can also be accessed through these cards on the landing page. I'm going to start by going to the dataset section. And I just want to point out that this is where you can access datasets from various repositories, assuming you have access. So a lot of these repositories will have their own workspaces or their own interfaces for browsing data. So you can, for example, in this particular case, you can select your cohort. So there's a 3,500 participant data set here, and I can inclusively select whoever I want out of this data set, and then I can save that cohort and export it to a workspace. And so there are a number of different options here. In addition to the data sets, we also host a number of workflows. So these are our GATK best practices workflows. You can also find additional workflows in DocStore and import them directly to your workspace. And the same is true for the BroadE methods repository, which is a legacy repository from back before Terra was called Terra, when it was still called FireCloud. And both of these also allow you to upload your own workflows. So if you want to write your own workflows in Whittle and upload them to the doc store so that you can then share them amongst your colleagues, then you can do that very easily here. So I kind of skipped over featured workspaces because that's where we're going to go to find the featured workspace that we're going to use to get our first tour of an actual workspace. So we'll come back to that in a moment, because just before we go there, I just want to point out all of the support offerings that are also exposed through the main menu. So if you click on support, there's a number of links to our various tutorial materials, quick start guides. We have a whole YouTube channel full of videos. You have the ability to request features if at some point you find yourself doing something that you think would be very simple to improve. Please let us know. There's a very active community forum. In addition to that, you can always contact us using either this form, or you can just send an email to support@terra.bio. They're very responsive. We are very enthusiastic about helping everybody get started on Terra. So don't hesitate to send us a message if you're having any types of troubles. So with all that being said, this is the portion where I would like for those of you who want to follow along to start following my actions. So go ahead and find the featured workspaces section of the library. You can do that by clicking on the main menu and going to featured workspaces, or from one of the cards on the landing page. I'm just going to give everyone a moment to find their way over here. So I'm assuming everyone has found their way over to the featured workspaces list. I just want to point out all the different types of featured workspaces that we have. There's a number of different use cases, different analysis tools. So there's a workspace specifically for bioconductor users, one for Hail users. I'm sorry, there's multiple. So there's 2 workspaces for bioconductor, 2 workspaces for Hail users. There's a number of workspaces for different experimental strategies, scientific domains, different data sets, anything you can imagine. What we're going to do, and of course, I always want to mention that we have these great getting started workspaces that are very smooth tutorials for anyone trying to learn how to use Terra. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in COVID, and that pulls up every workspace with the word COVID. And we're actually going to look at this bottom one that just says COVID-19, not the viral NGS one or the cross-tissue analysis. So I'm going to click into this. I'm going to wait just a moment so that everyone can join me. I'm going to assume everyone has been able to find this workspace. If you're having any trouble, make sure you post in the chat, and the TAs will either help you, or if too many people are behind, then the TAs will tell me to slow down. Don't worry about that. It's not a problem. So here we are in the public read-only version of this workspace. I know that this is a read-only version of this workspace because it says so right here. So I am not one of the owners of this, so I don't have access to various things, like I can't modify this dashboard, for example. And you can also see the workspace name up here. And these environment configurations, which also should not be accessible to me because this is not a workspace that I own. So before I continue, I'm going to clone this workspace. Just before I clone my own copy of this workspace, so I want everyone to do that with me. And you'll do that by pressing this 3-dot button and clicking clone. And when you do that, you have to give your workspace a unique name. The name has to be unique per billing project. So since you're all going to select, or I assume most of you will select the temporary billing project that we all added you to, then within that billing project, every workspace has to have a unique name. So just add your initials. Don't just add today's date because everybody's here today. You don't need to make any other selections, so don't worry about that. You can just go ahead and click Clone Workspace. Before I do that, I just want to point out a couple of things on the dashboard that will change once I'm looking at my own version. So first of all, of course, this workspace information is going to change because there's going to be a new created date. I'm going to have a new access level. The cloud information card here also has some details about the workspace and the location of the Google bucket that is created for this workspace. So this workspace exists on the Google Cloud. It gives you the location for the bucket that was created. It shows the Google project ID, and it shows the Google bucket name. So this is something that's kind of important to notice. This is going to change because every time you clone a workspace or create a workspace from scratch, you also create a dedicated workspace bucket. This is one of 2 storage locations that we'll be dealing with today. So the workspace bucket is the one that persists so long as your workspace exists. In addition to that, the owners will change. So the owners of this public version will be replaced by my name, and the tags won't change. And I believe the notifications should still stay checked. I do apologize. I'm a little bit sick. I'm going to go ahead and clone this. I will also use the workshop version. Oh, I didn't follow my own advice. Say AK October. It gave me a little error message at the bottom there that said that I needed a unique name. So here we are now. I am looking at my own clone of the workspace. There are several things that you can notice right away have changed. In addition to the workspace information, the read-only banner over here is gone. The workspace name up here has now changed to my unique name. And also, you can see that at the beginning of this line is actually the name of the billing project that I used to create this workspace.
There's a question in the chat, Anton. Can you speak more to the bucket location for the workspace?
Yes, absolutely. So that's actually the very next thing that I was going to mention. And you might need to be more specific about what you'd like to know about the bucket location. But so as soon as we cloned this workspace, we created a dedicated Google bucket for the workspace that you can actually access, and you can copy the address to your clipboard so that you can use gsutil commands. You can open the bucket in your browser and just look around in it as you would normally for a Google bucket. So if you like to use Google Buckets in that way, then you can just go ahead and open it directly in the Google Cloud interface. We'll also show you in a moment how you can access the Google Bucket through the Terra interface in the Data tab. Is there anything more specific that you'd like to know? So as you can tell, this bucket is more or less empty. The only things that are in it currently are the Jupyter Notebook files that come with this workspace, and there's more on that later.
So the question, someone posted another question about this. My understanding about the region is that the data needs to be in the region, or you pay to move data to the region, i.e. if your data was in Iowa, but I set up my cloud environment in the Northeast.
I'll jump in because I've been doing a lot. That is an egress fee is when you move your data in between regions. And Google recently changed the way they charge for egress, and going forward for most users, that's true. There is a charge so if your data is in US Central 1, but your compute engine is in US Central 2 or Europe or something like that, you would pay to move it between those regions. The recommendation that we make is to try and keep the region we use is US Central 1, but the recommendation is to try and keep your data and your compute, your workflows compute engine and your interactive analysis compute engine in the same region, and you can control all those in Terra. So that's why that's recommended. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ali.
Yeah, that was good, Ali. I would say another thing in
Emily
general.
Shaw has raised a hand. I just call that out.
I just wanted to make a comment about the Google's pricing change. Everybody will be getting an email either later today or tomorrow about the multi-region pricing changes. Historically, many people used the multi-region because you didn't have to deal with remembering where you were putting your data because you paid a little bit more and it could be available everywhere. The pricing change is substantial, but we have about 18 months of a pricing freeze. So you're still able to use multi-region at the previous cost, and that's a special deal with BroadE paid buckets. But you'll get an email detailing out the changes as well as the timeline for the price freeze to end either later today or early tomorrow. You can feel free to email me or DM me on Slack if you have any specific questions about the pricing.
One final note I'll add for now, because I imagine the question came up for a lot of folks because when you were cloning, the module asks you what bucket location you want. By default, we have the US Central 1 selected, and we recommend sticking with that for now if you don't have any specific region you want to put it in.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll continue with the tour for now. So as I said, this is now our own or my own clone of this workspace. I can now do a whole bunch of other stuff in it. I can create new interactive analyses environments. I can do things like edit this dashboard. So the dashboard is just one large markdown field. So I can edit it all I want. Save it. And so the dashboard is where you can learn all of the information about a particular featured workspace. So there's a long description here of what you can find in the COVID workspace. And in addition, that's right. The owners have now changed to me. And that's really the main things that have changed on the dashboard section. So with that, we're going to move on to the data page. And this is one of the most important aspects of the Terra platform. So I'm going to pause for a second to ask everybody to join me on the data page of their cloned workspace. In a moment, we're actually going to have our first brief breakout activity, which is just going to be a think, pair, share activity where we're going to send you to breakout rooms to just discuss what you see around your data tab. So I'm going to take a moment to describe it at a very high level, and then we'll send you to breakout rooms to answer some questions for yourselves, and then we'll all come back and discuss them in more detail, and I'll show you all of the bells and whistles that you can find in this section. So you can see here that we have different tables. We have a sample table and a sample set table. So before I describe what's actually in here, I'm going to let everyone here take a look and make up their own minds on what they think they see. In addition to the metadata and input and output files that you can find in the data tab or in the data tables, there is a section for reference data. So no reference data has been added to this particular workspace. This is just a convenient place to add some standard reference data. So like the B37, HG38, so very well-known reference data. In addition to that, there is also a section for workspace data where you can have more workspace specific reference data. And this has to be input into your workspace kind of on an individual level. When you create a clone of a workspace, nothing travels with the Google bucket, but all of the metadata in the tables and in the workspace data do travel with your clone. So if I had gone into the, so if I were to upload a bunch of things to my workspace bucket and then create a clone of this workspace, create another separate clone of this workspace, the files that I uploaded to my workspace bucket would not travel with it. The only thing that would travel with it would be the notebooks that are contained in the analysis tab, and we'll get to that in a moment, and all of the data in the data tables and in the workspace data. So the data tab contains these tables that allow you to organize all of your data in the cloud. This includes metadata, this includes input files and output files, sample information, reference information. A very important aspect of Terra, something that's critical for understanding why it's so convenient, is that these links point to different cloud locations, and your files, your input files and your output files don't have to be in the same place. They don't live in your workspace bucket. They live wherever they are in the cloud. And the workspace data tab allows you to organize basically pointers to those files so that you can run workflows against them, so that you can localize them to your interactive analyses environments as needed. But this is kind of a critical aspect of Terra, is that it allows you to organize large genomic files kind of in the form of metadata by creating these links that point to those data. So the data is primarily organized into these tables. This particular workspace holds information for viral isolates that underwent whole genome sequencing, as someone pointed out. So if we click on the sample table, then we see that it looks like a spreadsheet. And indeed, I'll show you how to download this as a TSV later on. And then we can also, we can export this. We can download this as a TSV, and we'll take a look at doing that in just a moment. And so we can open this in our favorite spreadsheet editor and then re-import it however we like. There's a very simple and specific rule for the syntax that has to do with the top left cell of the spreadsheet, and that's about the only thing that you need to know in order to be able to work with these as spreadsheets. Of course, you can also edit them inside of the UI. You can click edit data. You can add as many columns or rows as you want. You can edit selected rows. And you can also create sample sets. As someone pointed out, we have sample sets here that refer to sets of samples that are contained in the larger sample table. And if we want to create a sample set, we can also do that through the user interface by selecting, a set of rows. And we can, I just did this. Oh, I'm sorry, it's right here. Save selection as a set. So I can save this selection as a set. And now I have an additional set, an example set. So one of the more difficult things, one of the more complicated concepts for people to understand when they're new to the cloud is that your input and output files don't have to be in the same cloud location, as I mentioned. And that's because the data tables point to those locations, as I mentioned. When you click on one of these lines, you can even see the specific location. You can see a summary of the size of that file. Depending on the type of file, you can see a preview of that file. So obviously with a BAM file, there won't be a preview, but if this were a spreadsheet of some sort, you could see a preview of it. If it were an HTML file, I believe you would just see what's inside of it. And in addition, there is a very convenient way to copy the gsutil copy command for this file. So I can literally just click this button and it will copy this entire command to my clipboard, which is the command to copy this entire file in its cloud location. So wherever this particular file lives, I have the entire command for copying it to whatever local directory I want. It even includes the all-important period. And of course, you can download the file, which carries an egress fee. So it's important to understand that on Terra, you are charged for three things. You are charged for egress, you are charged for storage, and you are charged for computational resources. So in this particular demonstration, we're not going to do much in terms of storage and egress, but we are going to launch an interactive cloud environment, and that's the thing that you really need a billing project for. You do, of course, need a billing project in order to clone a workspace, because that in itself is a form of storage. It's a fairly small amount of storage just to create a workspace. So don't worry too much about that. And yeah, so in other words, tables link to the files where they exist. You don't necessarily need to move them to analyze them. In some cases, they still need to get localized, but you skip a very costly and inefficient step of having to bring them into different locations. They can just stay right where they are. So by using tables, you can keep track of the data that's related to the sample in one place, the row corresponding to the sample. And this is useful to both computational researchers who want to automate their analyses, right? Because you can point to all of these rows. You can create sample sets if you don't want to point to rows individually, because you know that you're going to be running analyses on large chunks of cohorts, for example. But also to non-computational colleagues who want to find information like outputs easily. So for example, if you're a PI and you just want to see some quality control metrics for a sample, then you could just search for that sample. So I can just take this sample ID, copy it and put it in here. And then I can find all of the rows with this ID. You can also search across tables. So if I put this in here, then it will show me how many items are in each one of my tables. So I have a sample table that has 2 items matching this search. And in my sample set, none of the items match this item. But so you can search across data tables, which is also very convenient. And also I can filter what I see for the sake of convenience. So a workspace like this is a great example of a data table that has a lot of different columns. So let's say that I was very specifically looking for one column. I would, for example, I could deselect all of the columns and then select whichever column I wanted to look at, and then it would only display that one. And then I can choose as many columns as I want. And so this gives me a convenient way to look at just the information that I want when there's a huge amount of it all in front of me. The tables can be named however you want, and you can have as many rows and columns. And on the back end, these are TSVs, as I mentioned. So if I want to download a TSV, let's say I decided to download this, and then open it. I'm going to go ahead and open this in my regular text editor, and you will notice that the top left cell is formatted in a very specific way. It says entity, and then colon, and then sample ID. And that is how you name your sample table. So if I were to, and I unfortunately, I guess I won't be able to demonstrate changing it myself so that I would rename this, but if I were using a spreadsheet editor, I could name this to, something else like units, and I would save it and I would re-upload it using the import data button, and then I would see a new table named units. Right. I'm just giving everyone a moment to try it out. And now is a great time to ask questions about how the data tables work. So I'll just recap quickly the different sections that we have here. We have the tables section that essentially allows you to set up spreadsheet-like tables of data. We have the reference section that allows you to select pre-existing table for common genomic references like HG38. And when you select a reference, the table will hold files like FASTA files, index files. You have an other data section where you have workspace data. And this workspace data is in the format of key and value pairs. So if I wanted to add a new variable, then I would have to give it a key and then add a value for it to access when pointing to the key. And then finally, there is the files section. And this is the place where we've exposed the workspace Google bucket. So if I want to upload things to my Google bucket, I can just use this button and upload, anything I like. For example, my sample TSV. And then if I wanted to copy that to another location, then as I showed, you can use this copy to clipboard. And here you can actually see a preview of that file. So we're going to move on with our tour of the workspace. We're going to very briefly look at the analyses tab. We're not going to spend too long here because after our break, we're actually going to go to another workspace where we're going to spin up a interactive analysis environment of our own and launch a Jupyter notebook, not this one. But you can see that there is a Jupyter notebook already contained in this workspace. You can actually find the raw file for it inside of the Files tab in the Notebooks folder. So you can see this is the name of this notebook, COVID-19 Data QC. And when you want to launch an interactive cloud environment, you use this sidebar over here, which we're going to do in the second portion of our demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone to launch their cloud environment right before we go for a short break so that it can spin up and be ready to go when we get back from our break. But just briefly, in the analyses tab is where you can organize all of your different interactive analyses, your different Jupyter notebooks, and the way to launch different interactive analyses applications is through this sidebar. You can launch a Jupyter notebook, you can launch RStudio, you can launch Galaxy instance, and we have a lot of documentation on doing all of these things. In addition to the analyses tab, there's a workflows tab. So many workspaces come with a bunch of workflows. And we won't go into the details of how to launch these workflows. We have a lot of documentation and tutorial materials on doing this. But just briefly, when you go into a workflow and you select the sample or sample set, when you select the entity type that is based on what tables you have in your data tab, then you can point to all of the data in those tables in a very convenient syntax. And like I said, we won't go into the details of what that syntax is in this demonstration, but we're happy to answer questions about that. And once you have configured your workflow such that you can run the analysis, then the workflow records will show up in your job history tab. And so that gives you an idea of the components of the workspace. So with that being said, I'm going to direct everyone to the workspace that we'll be using for our demonstration. So we're going to go to Workspaces, and we're going to search for T101. We're going to click on Public. So I'm going to stay right here on this page for everyone's sake, if anyone's trying to follow along. So this is where you find that workspace. Once you find it, go ahead and click on it and clone your own version. I'm just going to pause for a minute and let everybody do that. And then we're going to launch an interactive cloud environment. And then we're going to pause for about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back and run a Jupyter notebook. So here I am again in my freshly cloned version of the T101 Quick Start workspace. And I'm going to go ahead and launch a Jupyter environment. I'm going to launch a default one. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about all the different customization options, but we can do that as part of the second portion of the demonstration. So for now, I'm just going to click create, and I hope everyone else will follow along with me. And now you'll see that the status for this item is that it should now be creating, and that'll take about 3 to 5 minutes. I'll just point out that you can also see that here in the cloud environment section. So here I am now creating a cloud environment on my workshop billing account. This cloud environment comes with its own persistent disk, and we'll talk more about that when we come back. Hi, everyone. So we'll get started again in just a second. If you've been following along, then you should see right now that your cloud environment is running. I saw in the chat, there's a question under the create button. It mentions running cloud compute cost, paused cloud compute cost, and persistent disk cost. And yes, we will discuss these right now. So as I mentioned earlier, the things that you are charged for on Terra are egress, storage, and compute costs. In the case of interactive analyses like Jupyter Notebooks, this means that when you launch a Jupyter Notebook, there is a cost associated with that virtual computer running in the cloud. And we've selected the default environment, which is costing us about 6 cents per hour. In addition to that, there is a persistent disk that costs about 1 cent an hour. We can select different settings that will make these costs a little bit different, and I'll show you how to customize those settings right now. But in general, that's what a default environment will cost. And you can also see those things reflected, again, if you go to your cloud environment section. And if you have your cloud environment in a paused setting, it will also incur a certain cost. It won't be the same as while it's running. This is a cost-saving measure. You can pause it either inside of the workspace itself or using this button. I won't do that right now because if I click it, it will take several minutes to pause and then several more minutes to unpause. So I recommend that you don't try to do it if you want to follow along. So we've created a machine with a default environment and all the default settings. But if we wanted to create a machine that was more tailored to our needs, we would simply need to click on the settings button. If I were to change all of these settings, then I could actually just update the machine that I'm running on. So a cloud environment on Terra is made up of several components. So it has three parts. It has software, it has compute settings, and it has a persistent disk. So for the software, you can choose a different type of Dockerized environment depending on your needs. So we have a number of Dockers that are available for different types of use cases. So there's a bioconductor one, there's Hail and Python. There are Docker environments for GATK users. There's also a section for community maintained cloud environments. In addition to that, if you're a fan of Dockerizing your own cloud environments, then you can do so. You can add your own Dockers to the Doc Store or the Google Container repository. And you can just point directly to your own custom Docker. We have documentation on creating Dockers and on pointing to your own custom Dockers if that's what you desire to do. In addition to that, you can see what's installed on any of our readily available environments by clicking on this button. So all of these have different types of packages. So this particular environment has a bunch of Python packages and Spark tools. If I were to look at the R bioconductor Docker, then I could select either Python or R to see which R packages and which Python packages come on this environment. And so that's how you select your application configuration. In addition to that, you can select a whole bunch of things in your cloud compute profile. So I'm going to change some of these, and you'll notice as I change them that the price for running the machine or store or having a paused machine will change. So if I want, for example, a larger number of CPUs, then this price will increase. I can enable GPUs if I want to use machine learning. I can also use a startup script, which is similar to using a custom environment. It's kind of a simpler way of customizing your environment in a fast way. So it's a way to kind of speed up the process of getting started in an environment that already has all of the packages that you want. In addition to that, you can change your compute type from a standard virtual machine to Spark mode, to a Spark single node or to a Spark cluster. And so you can see that, that a Spark cluster costs more even in the paused motif. And of course, that also calls up a whole bunch of extra options. And so finally, we have our persistent disk. So there are two storage locations that we'll be dealing with today. There are two storage locations that are associated with your workspace. There is the workspace bucket, which is created when you clone a workspace or create one from scratch, and that one exists so long as the workspace exists. But when you use an interactive environment, your interactive environment comes with its own persistent disk, and you can change the size of that persistent disk. So let's say I want it to be 100. Now you can see I've doubled the cost of storing things on this persistent disk per month. And the reason that this is called a persistent disk is because it's detachable. So let's say you've done a bunch of work in your Jupyter notebook, and anytime you generate a file through your Jupyter notebook, that file will by default be saved to your persistent disk rather than to any other location like your workspace bucket. If you want to delete your environment but retain the things in your persistent disk, you can do that. So if I were to click delete while selecting keep persistent disk, then when I go back to my cloud environment section under my profile, then I'll be able to see that the persistent disk is still there. And when I recreate a cloud environment on this billing project, I will be able to reattach that persistent disk to the new cloud environment. So I can continue doing analyses on the same files. So I know there were some questions about this. I'm going to pause for a second to see if anybody wants to bring up any questions before we launch our notebook.
I had a brief question about calculating persistent storage or persistent disk rather. Does Terra like advise what's like optimal for an end user depending on what the data they're dealing with? Like how might a user know in advance they might have like a out of memory issue in advance? Is there anything that Terra provides?
Aaron, are you asking about workflows? Like if you're running a workflow and you maybe have an out of memory issue, like do we prevent that from happening for you if we know that might be an issue with the way you've configured your environment?
I'm not familiar enough with Terra to know specific to workflows. I'm just curious if, like, if I'm a end user and I don't know much about resource configuration, if like there's something about Terra that provides more optimal output, maybe rather whether it's cost or just performance.
Yeah. So I'd recommend starting with defaults. And actually I'll be going into billing more in my presentation, but starting with the default environment settings. And then we have a lot of documentation and tutorials where we share like, oh, you know, if you want to run this pipeline, here is how we've configured the workflow and the parameters for the machine. And, you know, this is what we recommend when the data is this size. So you can kind of poke around and sort of learn that through, I think, looking at our featured workspaces and through our documentation. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to answer Aaron's question from the team? Okay. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, is to start with the defaults, and then definitely if you want to see some other examples, then you can check out our featured workspaces to see how things are sized.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany. So we'll go ahead and continue with the demonstration of the interactive analysis notebook that we have. So really briefly, I just want to say that the story in this quick start learning tutorial is one about exploring the data for a cohort of students. So there's a larger tutorial that you're welcome to do where you actually get to launch the workflows in which you create GPAs for these students, but these data are also pre-populated into this workspace so that we can just go ahead and run our downstream analysis. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to open our Jupyter notebook. We're going to open this one that says Analyze Height GPA. And the story here is that we have a set of students. We have a set of 68 students, I'm sorry, 86 students, and we have a smaller subset of students, and we are going to analyze whether or not there's a correlation between their GPAs and their heights. And the idea is that we can learn different things by picking different sample sizes, and that it's very convenient to do this inside of Terra. So I'm going to click into this notebook, and I'm just going to show everyone around briefly at the Jupyter interface as it's implemented in Terra. So first of all, when you click on the notebook, you're going to first see a read-only preview. And this is a convenience for when you haven't yet launched a cloud environment. So you can always see the read-only preview, including in workspaces where you don't have compute access. So you can look inside. And if the results are pre-populated, you can even check to see if they're, the kinds of results that you might expect. So for example, I would scroll down through this analysis of whether or not GPA is correlated with height, and I would find out that it seems like in my small sample set it is, and I would immediately find that suspicious. Is that an artifact of the experimental design? Is that an indication of bias? And then I would want to then open this notebook and rerun this against a larger data set. So I'm going to click open. I'll point out that there are two different compute modes. Open will open this in edit mode, and playground mode will open a version of this notebook that doesn't autosave. So when I am in edit mode, every change that I make to the notebook cells will get autosaved to the IPyNB file that's in my workspace bucket. Whereas if I were to go into the playground mode, none of those changes would be autosaved. And the reason that we've implemented this is so that you are able to work in the same notebook, in the same workspace with multiple people, so that you're not overwriting one another. And so if I open this notebook in my workspace and I were to share this workspace with another person, and my colleague were to go into the same workspace and open the same notebook, they would not be able to open it in edit mode, because then we would run the risk of overwriting one another. But in order for people to be able to launch computations inside of the notebooks, nevertheless, we have implemented this playground mode. So that's what the playground mode does. So here we are in our active Jupyter notebook. And we have here a fairly standard Jupyter notebook interface. We have two different types of cells. There are markdown cells and there are code cells. So all of these here at the top are markdown cells that contain information that's about the notebook. There's all sorts of formatting that's available in the markdown language. And in order to run a cell, I can either click this run button. I can hit shift return. That's the hotkey for running a cell. So there I ran that markdown cell with shift return. Here I can run the cell using this run button. And also conveniently under the cell menu, you can run all of the cells in a notebook all at once. You can run all of the cells above or below whichever cell you've selected. And yeah, so there are two different types of cells. There are markdown cells and there are code cells. So be careful not to inadvertently try to run a code cell as a markdown cell or vice versa. So if I were to change this to a markdown cell, it would no longer run code. So I'm going to keep that as a code cell, and vice versa. If I tried to run this as a code cell, then it will error out for me. So I won't do that. Our Jupyter notebooks come equipped with either Python kernels or R kernels. And the way that you change kernels is through this kernel menu. So I can change from a Python 3 to an R kernel, and that would be reflected over here. So I'm going to go ahead and run this cell. And when I do, you'll notice, first of all, that this dot fills in. So right now it says kernel idle. And while I run this, it will say kernel busy. Well, it wasn't busy for very long, so we didn't catch it. But while it was working, you may have also noticed that this field over here was filled in with an asterisk. And once it was finished running, it was replaced by a number. And this number represents the number of times that a command has been run since the last time the kernel was restarted. And so I can restart the kernel as much as I see fit. And if I were to rerun this again, it would still say 1. So I'm going to go ahead and click run all, but first I'm going to clear all of the outputs. So as you notice there, the outputs are already populated in this notebook. And so if I want to kind of be unbiased by the outputs that are already there, I want to see my notebook be completely clear. I will clear all of the outputs. Now they're all gone. And so we recommend that that's what you do as well. I'm going to hit run all, and I may have to rerun certain cells. So in this case, I didn't, because I already ran those initial package installations. But you may find that package install cells will make it so you have to then continue to run the cells after those package installations. So in this notebook, we start with loading some Python packages. So the first things that you typically need when you execute a notebook like this is to install some packages. This includes some very common ones that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, pandas and NumPy, matplotlib. In addition to that, we are installing the FIS toolkit, which is a toolkit for using Terra APIs through Python. And this is going to be the thing that allows us to capture data from our data tab and bring it into our notebook. So in addition to that, we're going to set some environmental variables, and this is kind of a best practice for running Jupyter notebooks on Terra, where we define our basically our billing projects and our workspace names as environmental variables, so that from now on in the rest of this notebook, wherever you say project or workspace or bucket, you're pointing at the billing project that you're on and the workspace that you're in and the bucket for this workspace. And then there's a little verification code here. So if you were able to run this cell successfully, then it should print out the workshop BroadE 2210 billing project, or whatever billing project you're using. It should print out the name of your project, and it should print out the name of the Google bucket that matches the one that you would have found on your dashboard. And so once we do that, we can start by using our FIS package to load in some of the data from our data table. So you can see here, I have loaded in the data that we saw in our data table. And so at this point, we're going to take about 10 minutes for people to just run through this notebook and figure out if they can basically replot the data for the small subset and just create their, replot it for the larger subset and recreate all of the graphics. And that will be the end of the hands-on demonstration. So I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions before we head out to breakout rooms. And then when we come back, we'll just recap briefly, and then Tiffany will tell us about billing on Terra. I'm just going to take like a minute to point out that you are capable of opening a terminal view into your virtual machine. So I restarted my default environment, and now if you take a look at the sidebar, down here is a button for a terminal. If I click that, it will open a plain old terminal view into my interactive analysis machine. So I can see what directory I'm in, and I can copy things into this directory. And so this, again, is just to emphasize the fact that there are two different storage locations that we've dealt with today. There is the workspace bucket, which has some files in it, for example, these notebook files. And I'm just going to demonstrate the fact that I can copy a file from my workspace bucket to my persistent disk like this. All I have to do is paste that command. And because these are all machines that already have GSUtil installed, all this works with no problem. Just takes a moment. Operation completed. And so if I were to look inside here, I can see that the file that I copied is now in here. And other than that, you have full access into the directories, into the file trees in your persistent disk. So again, this terminal is looking at your persistent disk. So I can CD into different parts of the file tree and look around and all that good stuff. I just wanted to make sure that I showed everyone that, because the fact that you can in fact run terminal commands in your interactive environment is very cool. And it also gives you a pretty handy way to find all of the files that you may have generated on your persistent disk. And then you can also copy them back and forth from this location. All right. So with that, we're going to do one last thing, which is pause our cloud environment, because we don't want to forget that and inadvertently run up our costs. Of course, in this case, it wouldn't be too big of a deal, but this is an important thing to demonstrate. It's a very simple to pause your cloud environment right here by clicking pause. You can also do so in your cloud environment section. And of course, you can and should also delete your cloud environment once you're not using it. So in fact, I can delete it. I can select to delete the persistent disk that came with it because there's nothing on it that I particularly want to keep. So if I click that, then my status is going to change from running to deleting. If I had clicked pause, it would change to pausing and then eventually to paused. And so, yeah, after a couple of minutes, this will disappear, as will this, and I will no longer be incurring this cost. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Tiffany so that we can talk a little bit in more detail about how billing works in Terra.
All right, so hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Miller and I'm the Director of Customer Success and Program Management within the Data Sciences platform. And I'm happy to give you some information today about billing in Terra. How do you manage your cloud spend? How do you estimate spend? And how do you get going if you're ready to make the next move of actually getting a billing account set up? The session goals for today, I'm going to read through each of them. And as I walk through them, think about if you actually already know the answers to some of these questions, because I think Anton did a really good job at covering a lot of what I'll be talking about today. And then at the end, what I'm going to do is quiz you all to see how much you remember. I like doing that because I think it makes the whole billing presentation a little bit more exciting. So the things that we'll cover today are what cloud computing vendors work with Terra, what costs money in Terra, and how you pay for it. How do you pay for it? What is the Terra billing project, and how is it connected with a workspace? Where can you see how much you've spent? And are there any recommendations for getting started with running analyses and securely sharing workspaces? All right. So we're going to start off with the cloud vendors question. So this picture here shows some of the top cloud vendors: Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. And these cloud platforms offer technical infrastructure to customers at a cost. They make money from charging usage fees to customers on a pay-as-you-go basis. So if you use a machine in their data center, they're going to charge a fee. And Terra makes use of cloud vendors to give researchers the ability to scale their analyses, to share their data and their work in a way that is different from the traditional way that we've talked about, where you have all of your data and maybe your computing environments and your local infrastructure, and it's really difficult to share it. So by making it available on the cloud, that helps with the collaboration problem. So you can sign up for Terra, for a Terra account at no cost, which many of you did before this workshop. And with that account, you can browse data sets and you can browse content like featured workspaces and things like that. But when you actually want to run an analysis or do anything that costs any money, you need to either set up billing or get access to someone else's workspace or billing. And we'll talk more about that later, about the different ways in which you can do that without having to set up a cloud billing account from scratch. So you can set up billing directly with a cloud vendor or a reseller, and we'll talk about what that means. Basically, resellers can take care of all of that stuff for you. To answer the question about what cloud vendors Terra works with, as you've seen today, we work with the Google Cloud Platform. We're established there first, and now we're moving over to being able to support Microsoft Azure. So we're going to talk a lot today about setting up Google Cloud billing accounts, but in the future, as you can imagine, with Azure, we'll want to explain how that billing account setup works as well. So kind of to summarize, Terra is free to use if you're, just wanting to kind of poke around and see what's out there, but since we're making use of the cloud and you have to pay for what you use on the cloud, that's where you're kind of paying the Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure to use their resources. So let's review the three main ways cloud vendors charge money. Anton talked about these as well already, but first is compute. So in your workspace, you can run workflows. We didn't go over that, but you saw the workflows tab. We did show you interactive analyses, and all of that basically equates to compute costs because you can spin up virtual machines or clusters of machines to run interactive analyses. Anton demoed how you can select different machine attributes, and each of those have different associated costs for how long you use them. And then when you're actually running analyses, specifically, when you're running workflows, you end up generating different logs and metadata, intermediate files. And when you're doing that within your workspace, it actually gets stored in your workspace's storage bucket. So that's where the data storage cost comes in. So you'll hear people talking about workspace bucket or Google bucket, and that's what we're referring to on the workspace level, is this place where you can bring data into the cloud to run analyses on, or when you're actually running workflows, or if you want to save any data from your interactive analyses in a more permanent storage location, you have that Google bucket to do that. And then the last place that you can accrue costs is for egress, and you can think of egress as moving data around. At the beginning, we were talking about how when you move data from different regions, it can cost money there, or when you're moving it off of the cloud or to a different cloud, there's some money associated with moving the data around. All right, so how do you access these services in Terra? All right, so you can access these services in a place called a workspace. We did that today. And a workspace is where you can organize your project. And we again showed how you could do that today, organize all of your data and analyses in one place. And when you create the workspace, it comes with that Google bucket. So costs are therefore organized by the workspace in the workspace area. And in this image, you can see each row represents a workspace. I can grant people roles to read or write to my workspace. And that is actually one way in which you can give people permission to spend money in Terra, is actually by giving them a writer or owner or can compute permission to your workspace. So that's a nice way of being able to collaborate without having to go through the steps of setting up billing. These workspaces are connected to the cloud platforms by way of a feature that we call a Terra billing project. And the Terra billing project is actually that is a part of the workspace's name. You don't see it here, but when you actually click in is when you can see that. So the Terra billing project is used to pay for what you do in your workspace, and essentially it is connected with a cloud billing account. So you can see here in the screenshot that I can give my billing project a unique name, and then I can select a billing account that's set up right now in Google to charge money back to. There's a few steps to configure the ability for Google to know to share the billing account with my identity in Terra. And so we have some nice documentation that goes through that. But essentially, wanted to differentiate these two terminologies here with the Terra billing project and the Google Cloud billing account. They're separate things. We connect them so that we can pass our costs from our workspaces back to the Google Cloud. All right. So now let's look at a few examples of compute costs. We'll go through each of those three ways that you can accrue costs and how you can kind of estimate or even see how much you could be spending or accruing in the Terra platform. Okay, so we talked a little bit about estimating workflow spend and how you could look at featured workspaces to sort of get an example of if I run this pipeline, on this sample size or input size, how much time should I expect it to take to run that pipeline or that workflow, and how much is it going to cost? So you can basically see that some examples of that in your featured workspace, featured workspaces. But what happens a lot of time is when people actually get going and they're maybe using a pipeline, that's new or that they've written, they can make use of this built-in cost reporting that you can see here on the job history page or tab of your workspace. If you're a BroadE Institute Terra user, this is already set up for you, but there are a few steps if you do not have a BroadE billing sub account, and that's only because we basically need to get permission from the whoever is funding you to show this information and share it back with Terra. So that's why there's some steps to configure it. But again, this is where you can look and see how much it costs to run your workflow. And in terms of getting started, we always recommend to run on a small input size and see how much that costs, and then scale up your input sizes to see how that impacts your workflow. Maybe you have to tweak your configuration to allow it to scale up more, but that's kind of a way that we recommend you get a sense of how much it's going to cost to actually to do all of your compute within Terra. All right. And then the last note here is adding a buffer for failed jobs. So, not all of your, when you're testing a new workflow, not all of the times that you run it will it succeed. So you can add a little buffer for failed jobs. There's also this feature called call caching that we didn't really go into today, but basically what that is the ability to, you turn that on, and as you're working, if you end up having some failed jobs, it will basically take all of the work that you've done successfully, and on the next time you rerun your job, it'll start from there instead of starting from the beginning. So that's something to be aware about, to know about as you're getting started with Terra. Okay, so we talked about workflows and that compute. Now let's talk about interactive analysis. Anton did a great job talking about this widget here and how you can kind of configure your different, the different machine sizes and the type of machine, the persistent disk. And so the only thing I wanted to point out here is we do provide a cost estimate in the widget so that you know about how much it's going to cost. So, and here on the slide, we just have a way to estimate, if you imagine your cost per hour and how many hours it might take you to kind of play around to get your analysis done, then you can figure that amount out and then add the cost of just having the persistent disk around living in case you want to save the data back to that as you're working. So that's a way that you can kind of estimate how much things cost. We always recommend you to delete the cloud environments that you're not using, so you're not just paying for this machine that's paused. It's not that much, but you don't want to have that living around and then you forget about it. So we always recommend to try to delete those things, clean that place up, clean that page up as you're working. And then also auto pause is something that we have turned on so that people, if they're not working, it pauses the machine and you're not paying for the machine if you're not working on it. Okay, so for storage costs, here's just a screenshot of where you can see that information on the dashboard. So that's a way of getting, a good sense of how much it's going to cost you to keep data in your workspace's Google bucket. And there's certain permissions that you have to be able to see that number. So some of you might look at a workspace that you don't have that right permission to it, and you can't see it. So I just wanted you to know that. I believe it's owner and owner or project owner access. And folks, please comment if that's not right. But you need a certain permission to be able to see that. All right. Lastly, egress. So say you're working in Terra and you are done with your analysis and you might actually want to download and move that data off the cloud and put it somewhere that it has cheaper storage or cold storage or something like that. You can actually see in the data table, if you hover over a file, you can actually see how much it costs to download it. We also give you these handy commands as well to download it or to use to download the files. So that's a good way of understanding, when I'm done with this work and I want to take all of these files off the cloud, how much can I expect for that? Okay, so now I want to highlight the Google Cloud Console, because this is a really excellent place to see your actual costs. As they're happening in almost real time. We are working on spend reporting features in Terra so that you can see that at the billing project level. But the best place to look right now is to check out the Google Cloud Console and to actually look at the billing information there. So this is just a little screenshot of what that looks like and how you can basically see by the type of costs, how costs are broken down. So I can see here that I'm paying a storage persistent disk cost here. And that's how much I've spent for the last month. And then standard storage, I've got, this many gigabytes here for $28.34. So that's how much I'm paying. Yeah, so this is a great place to go check that out by SKU or by the product that the Google Cloud is offering. And we also have an article that explains how to analyze your bill and how to relate what you're doing in Terra back to a Google bill. So I recommend checking that out. Another cool thing that you can do in the Google Cloud Console is set up budget alerts. So this is really neat because you can set up actual budget alerts or forecasted budget alerts. So say I have a budget of $300 and I want to get an alert whenever I'm like 50% there, or I'm forecasted to reach 50% of that, or $150. I want Google to let me know. And so I can get those emails sent to me, and I can set them up at the workspace level, which is pretty cool. So if I have different workspaces that I have different, grants that I'm working on per workspace or something like that, then I can set up those billing alerts and then basically monitor how things are going while I'm working in Terra. Okay, so now let's talk about setting up billing and what are your options in Terra. So there's 3 options that I want to highlight. So the first is these are probably by the easiest order. So first is a collaborator can grant you CAN permission in a shared workspace. So we talked about that. You can be given owner or writer roles, and then that means you can actually do some computation in that workspace. And then your costs are actually going to be filed back to the billing project of whoever created that workspace, whatever billing project they used. Those costs will go back to them versus you paying for the cost. So say Liz has a workspace and gives me owner access on it. I can go run workflows in Liz's workspace, and I don't have to worry about who it's being charged to, because Liz, was comfortable with giving me permission to do work there and is worrying about the costs for the billing project. The second way is the owner of an existing Terra billing project can authorize you to use their billing project. So within the Terra billing project area, you can grant admins to your Terra billing project or users. And users, if I give people user access to my Terra billing project, which is what we did today for this workshop, you can basically spin up your own workspace, or you can clone a workspace. And those workspace costs, again, are covered by the Terra billing project that somebody gave you user access to. So that's kind of how we deal with workshops, is we use this mechanism. Okay, finally, you can use your own cloud billing account. So you can set up your cloud billing account. We have instructions for linking it to Terra. That's when you can then create your new Terra billing project, and then you can go from there, create or clone as many workspaces as you want. All right, so how do you go about setting up that Google Cloud billing account? One option is using $300 of Google free credits. And something that I'll caveat here is that I don't believe if you're using a BroadEinstitute.org account, you can take advantage of those $300 credits. I don't believe that's an option, but I'll talk about what BroadEs can do in a second, what the process is for them. So just wanted to note that in case people are trying to do this and they are having issues. So if you're using a different account, though, if you want to just use your Gmail personal account, you can set up and give free credits for $300, and you can use that. Also, you can use an institution or personal credit card for setting up that Google Cloud billing account. The second option is to use a third-party reseller. So we mentioned Strides for NIH or NIH-funded researchers, or Onyx Networking. So Strides, a lot of projects that the NIH has that are on using the cloud, they offer these Strides billing accounts. Strides is an initiative that they have to make it easier for people that are doing NIH work to get access to cloud credits and funding. And so they work with different vendors in the back end to kind of set up that billing for you and to provide you with information like billing reports and stuff like that. One that we also work with, and we have contact information in our documentation, is Onyx Networking. So they are somebody that we've used a lot in the past. Yeah, so I think that's all I'll say about third-party resellers. Basically, if you're intimidated to get billing started and figuring out how to analyze the bill, they can do a lot of work with you to kind of figure out how to manage it for you. And even they even do some interesting invoicing options. So that's an option for folks. So if you work at the BroadE, though, what do we recommend here? So we recommend that you speak with your grant administrator or your PI to determine the availability of funding and to figure out what like a monthly budget would be, your total budget for Terra. And then you can request a sub-account from BITS by filling out the form at this link. using your broadeinstitute.org account. So you can access the link at the slides, but essentially it's just a form that you fill out, and they'll help you get set up with that sub account. You need the information though about your budgets, monthly and total budgets, so that they can get started. Okay, and I included this slide here. This is in our documentation because I thought it was a nice diagram of your options. So I won't go through that right now, but that's there if you're a visual person and that's helpful for you. Okay, so let's finish off with the session goals. So we'll revisit them, and I will try to look in the chat. What cloud vendors work in Terra? See anyone post in the chat? I'll skip this one since it's, perfect, GCP, yes. Oh, so Google Cloud Platform and soon Azure. All right, the next question, what costs money in Terra and how do you pay for it? There are 3 things we talked about. Nice. NASCO, storage, compute, and egress. Yes. So how do you pay for it? Is you pay for your compute, storage, and egress with a Terra billing project that's linked to a cloud billing account. What is a Terra billing project and how is it connected with a workspace? Anybody? All right, I'll answer this one. Yes, it's a feature in Terra that connects a Google Cloud billing account and a workspace so that costs accrued in your workspace get paid for. All right, where can you see how much you've spent in Terra? Soon, a billing tab in Terra is the goal. Anybody else? GCP console? Okay, billing projects, billing tab, yep. Okay, so in Terra, it's a combination of the job history tab and workspace dashboard. And the source of truth is in the Google Cloud Console. All right, any recommendations for getting started with running workflows, cloud environments, and securely sharing workspaces? We didn't quite talk about the last one, but that's okay. Anybody? All right, this is a longer answer, so I'll give it to you. Start small, run workflows you're interested in on one sample first, see how much it costs, then scale up. Maybe sample is not the right word, but one input of whatever makes sense for your workflow. When you're done using the cloud environments, delete them. And then something we didn't talk about a lot today, but there's the ability to use groups within Terra, and you can kind of think of it like a Google group. You can take a group and you can basically share your workspace with that group, and anyone who is in that group can then access your workspace. And what's really nice about that feature is if you have a lab that's growing and shrinking and managing, who has access to what can be kind of complicated. So we provide the ability for people to create groups to help manage their permissions on their different billing projects, workspaces, and so on. So make sure that whenever you are sharing your workspace with folks, you're comfortable with them using it and having the ability to spend money on it if you're giving them, compute permissions and things like that. So, all right, that's it for me. Do we have any questions? I got a question about how to delete a cloud environment in the chat. So I'm going to quickly, if I can type, Terra. Bio. Oh, I knew that was going to autocorrect. Oh well. We'll go here to cloud environments, and I'll show you how to do that. So another question, I wasn't clear on what the best practice of assigning roles for collaboration is. Using a shared workspace with a single non-BroadE funded billing project where multiple analysts do partially overlapping analyses with a common set of data. Yeah, so yeah, what I would do is using a shared workspace with a single non-BroadE cloud. I think that's a fine way of setting it up, of giving people access, individually. If it's a small number of people, if it's a large number of people that you're working together with, then you can use groups. So I'll just quickly show you that. So first of all, this is where you go to delete your cloud environments. It's on the cloud environments page here. I went here, and then I can see my cloud environments, and then I can click delete. So if I click delete, I can say also delete the persistent disk checkbox, and then go from there. I did not select that for now, though. In terms of creating groups, I can do that here. And here is where I basically create the group, and I have the group email listed here. I can copy that to my clipboard, and then I can go and add that to one of my workspaces. So I'll show you that really quickly. So we go here, go to share, and then I can paste. Oh, sorry, my screen sharing controls are hovering over my widget, so I can't see. There we go. Okay, so then I add that user email, and then I can say can be writers, can compute, and I can even allow them to be able to share my workspace if I want to. But that is how you'd share a group. Also, if you ever have issues, you can share with our support team by doing that, which is very handy if you're having issues. So I'm going to cancel that, but that's an example there.
Tiffany, do you mind keeping that up just another moment, the share module? So as an additional note for Joel's question, in terms of best practices, it'll be good to know what the role of each person in the collaboration is. So for instance, if you have collaborators that only need to see results, you can add them as readers to the workspace, and that way they can't run any compute. And in the case that you do need to get help from support, that share with support toggle won't alert the support team. So you'll want to write in to support@terra.bio, give them a link to the workspace, and let them know what's going on.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, any other questions?
I see there's a question, how to add buffer for failed jobs by Xiaomeng.
Yeah, so what I would do there is I would look at your job history and see how much it costs to run your workflow. And then when we say buffer for failed jobs, you could say like, maybe you expect your job to fail like, I don't know, 10 more times or something like that. You can kind of account for a portion of compute that could occur that you're not making use of or that you're paying for, and it's going to keep happening. So that's what I mean by adding a buffer for failed jobs. There might be compute, and this is really up to you, but there might be compute that you're spending that you're not making use of in the end. So that's how you can add like a buffer for that. Also, whenever you're running workflows and your jobs fail, there will be output files that get generated. So those files go to your Google Cloud storage bucket, and you'll be paying for the storage of those files. So again, it's sort of like you could delete those, but if you deleted those, then you can't take advantage of the call caching feature. So it's kind of this trade-off with how you want to work. But I think what I would recommend is starting off small. You can keep call caching on, and then running your workflow a few times to see how that looks in terms of costs. And then in terms of a buffer, I mean, it's optional. You don't have to do it. Depends on, I guess, how close you want to try to estimate your costs, but yeah. Okay. How to get access to controlled data already present in existing workspaces? Do I have to reach out to owners of those workspaces? Yeah, so controlled access data depends on how it's stored and where it's stored. There could be different mechanisms. I'll just speak for one data set as an example. So we have workspaces with TCGA data in them. And right now, what we have for authenticating is the ability to connect your ERA Commons account and to also log into the CRDC framework services. And by doing that, or using maybe one of these other services that maybe is helping control the authentication for getting access to the data, I can link those up, and then I can automatically be checked against the allow list that the NIH has for like the DB gap access to that data set. And if I have the data downloader role, then I'll be able to basically show Terra that I'm allowed to see that data, and then I can access that TCGA controlled access workspace. Did that make sense for the question asker, Sonu? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back over to Anton to kind of finish our session, and then we can answer any more questions people have.
Okay, so with that, I just want to finish off by thanking everyone for coming, and we'll open the floor up one last time to questions. I just wanted to leave you all with some information about additional resources that we have. We have a set of courses on the LeanPub platform that are all kind of self-onboarding for different types of use cases. There's, of course, an intro to Terra and a billing course that's just useful to everybody, but there's also a course that specifically teaches you all of the bells and whistles around using data tables. There's a course for those of you who want to do pipelining with the workflows, and a separate course for people who want to use the cloud environment. So what we didn't get to go into today were all the other applications that you can launch through the cloud environment, our Studio and Galaxy. So we wanted to make sure you were all aware of these materials. Excuse me. And of course, I wanted to also leave you with the links for our Terra support. So we have our support documentation linked in this slideshow, as well as our YouTube channel. And we have lots and lots of articles and a bunch of videos that will take you through step-by-step instructions of how to do pretty much anything you can imagine on Terra. So with that, I'm just going to reiterate that we would love for everyone to just take our survey. It says 5 minutes, but honestly, it's even shorter than that. It's a very simple survey, and it's very helpful to us to know what aspects of these workshops and webinars are most useful. And you can also tell us what you would like to see in the future. So all of these are available, all of these links are available in the slide deck in the public folder at BroadE.io, the BroadE.io link. And if someone could paste that BroadE.io link one last time in the chat, that would be lovely, as well as the SurveyMonkey link, just so we can make it as easy as possible to answer our survey. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone one last time and open the floor up to any other types of questions. We have about 10 minutes left, so you've made great time. I see a question. What is the most effective way of exporting results in order to minimize egress? That's a very interesting question. I feel like several of the TAs could weigh in on different answers.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the most straightforward ways is to keep the results in Terra in the workspace, have your collaborators invited to that workspace. That's one of the easiest ways to do it, because especially for workflows, there are ways to write your outputs back to your data table, which keeps everything nice and organized. If you wanted to have your results exported to a bucket that you own, or to a cluster or a local machine, yeah, to minimize egress, it's a good question. Because as far as I'm aware, that would essentially require a pretty straightforward, like copy out of the Google bucket. So let me do a little thinking to see if I can find a recommendation for how to minimize the egress, or I'll give someone else an opportunity to chime in if they know.
Can you zip up files in a Google Cloud bucket and then try to download it?
Good question. I don't think Google natively gives you the capability of zipping files within the bucket, but you can certainly, for instance, if you were working in a notebook, if you were working in a cloud environment, zip up files as part of your analysis, as part of your notebook, or whatever it is you're doing. It could be one of your last steps before you run a command to copy that results zip out somewhere else.
Yeah, Jason, you're saying that people definitely, from their local computer or wherever they're working, they can zip their files and then load them to a Google bucket, though. Like, that's not a problem.
They could, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're working in a cloud environment and you want your data to be accessible to other folks, you'll need to copy the files out of your cloud environment anyway. So you can copy them either to your workspace bucket, or you can export them to some other location.
I'll post a link to GCP's pricing calculator, so you can kind of see how much they think egress would cost. And then I'm sure their website has ideas for you as well, because really this is more of a GCP kind of question, I think.
Also, if you have specific questions about how you structure your cloud architecture, I can always you can always reach out to me, and I can connect you with a Google Success engineer as well.
Oh, I've seen this question before. Could Terra projects Workbench access buckets on AWS? So we have a hypothesis here that if you had DIRS URIs or a DIRS server, this is a specific way of creating a link to a file where it doesn't matter where it's living, what cloud it's living on. This is like an identifier that is, cloud agnostic. If you had the files in AWS available via that DIRS URI, and then when you're running compute, say you're running a workflow, if you then use AWS's like copying package to then copy the file to basically the place where the data is getting computed on, then maybe that would work. That's a hypothesis. So I think we need to figure out if we have the ability to test that.
Is there a Whittle course coming up soon? Is in another BroadE? I don't think there are ones planned right at the moment.
We can share a resource that links you to a recording of the previous 1 hour Whittle shop, if that's helpful. We can paste that into the chat. It'll link you to all the resources. I found the September 8th one. Oh, okay.
Hello, I was wondering if I might be able to ask a question specifically to sort of like the DSP TAs. Right now, I've been trying to get a name for someone who might be able to attend a meeting on November 2nd. I know that's very, very soon. There is a Google Infrastructure as a Service Technical Advisory Committee meeting happening on November 2nd, and unfortunately no one can attend from BITS because we have a mandatory on-prem meeting that day. And I've tried to ask a little bit around DSP, but I sort of got stuck in a hole and I wasn't sure who to ask, but I was wondering if anyone here might be able to volunteer, or would you know of anyone who might be able to be a representative of BroadE's interests at that meeting?
Emily, what's the goal of the meeting?
The goal of the meeting is to help guide Google's overall strategy. So basically there is a small number of sort of like larger volume customers that are able to sort of take part in a roundtable, discuss Google's future roadmap and how our priorities intersect with their roadmap.
Okay. I will DM you some thoughts.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. The few people who are still here to be thanked. If you haven't already, please fill out the survey, and we'll see you all around. And thank you to our wonderful TAs.
Thank you, wonderful presenter. Bye.
Yeah.
Now get better, Anton. I have to head to another meeting, but thank you all. See you later.
Bye, everyone.